good evening. Will, thanks very much for your time. You know, August is an interesting time in the Big Apple. A lot of people who live and work there head out to take a vacation. It's also a prime tourism time. And I'm just wondering if the Big Apple feels like the Big Apple at the moment or not quite yet.
Well, it certainly seems like a different breed of apple, if you want to look at it that way. It's certainly not business as normal by any stretch of the imagination here in New York. There are a few key differences. One is that indoor dining, of course, New York's seen as a culinary hotspot, not just in the United States, but of course around the world. Those indoor restaurants remain firmly shut. However, outdoor dining is very much in full force. We're seeing increasingly streets that are normally busy thoroughfares for traffic, like the one you can see behind me here. Many have been converted into pedestrian-only routes, especially on the weekend, to allow that outdoor dining. So that's given the city a very unique feel. However, there are certainly some big differences. If you go somewhere like Midtown Manhattan, of course, seen as a hugely busy commercial spot in the city, remaining very much more like a ghost town as many of these huge commercial areas, offices remain closed and people working remotely. So certain neighborhoods are certainly thriving, trying to adapt as best they can. Big commercial areas like Midtown still remain deathly silent, which is rather jarring for New York residents.
And now regarding the gyms, and this is of interest for us because our gyms are starting to reopen here in South Africa. My understanding is that across the state, gyms are opening, but in the city of New York itself, they're saying, hang on, let's wait a bit and let's get our schools ready because, of course, the school year is opening September, right?
That's absolutely right, Sally, September 10th. And the message is, just to clarify, is that the message from New York's Governor, Andrew Cuomo, so for the state of New York, says that gyms can indeed reopen. However, New York City's Mayor, Bill de Blasio, says that they won't begin to start reopening until September 2nd. The reason for that, as you so rightly mentioned, Sally, is because we've got these schools set to reopen. So the message is that they're prioritising having health inspectors going into the schools first, because a key message from the governor and the mayor is that for any gyms to reopen, they have to undergo health inspections to make sure that ventilation is adequate. That's just one of a number of health precautions that are put in place for these gyms as they begin to reopen. Capacity, that is going to be capped at 33%. People need to stay 6 feet from one another at all times. Of course, not easy to do in New York City at the best of times. Mask wearing compulsory at all times, as well as health checks as people enter the door. So gyms will begin to reopen, already getting underway in other parts of the state, but it's certainly not business as usual.
And what about things like museums in New York? You know, will crowds soon be thronging the Metropolitan? Will they be going to the Guggenheim? And what about Broadway? Are theatres open yet?
Absolutely, Sally. Well, behind me is the Brooklyn Museum. That is reopening its doors on September 12th, despite the fact that, like with gyms in the state of New York, they can begin to reopen, but with a 25% capacity. But a number of the huge museums here in New York City, the Guggenheim, for example, October 3rd is when it's set to open its doors, MoMA August 27th, the Met the 29th of August. You mentioned Broadway, though. They've already made the decision that they won't be opening their doors until January the 3rd at the very earliest. But of course, Broadway relies so heavily on international tourism, so there are real question marks over whether that date is even realistic.
Well, a different type of apple at the moment. Thank you very much.